Okay, here we have another talking book record player to add to my collection. This is a model A78 from 1978. You know, you can date these, or you can date the ones from the 70s and early 80s by the model number. But these were given out to individuals who had a visual or medical handicap that prevented them from reading standard printed material effectively. So, you know, they loaned out these players to such individuals for the purpose of playing talking books. Well, the talking book records were eventually superseded by cassettes, and the cassettes have been superseded by digital cartridges. And the records were phased out for good at the end of 2000. And here we go. This is the record player. This was an eBay purchase at a reasonable price. You know, these turn up on eBay often, but it's getting to the point where they always ask insane prices for them, although most of them don't sell. I mean, most people wouldn't have any use for something like this unless you had some old talking book records or had experience with the talking book program in the past. This thing plays speeds of 8, 16, and 33, and we have braille markings on our speed control, as well as on the power switch and the volume and tone controls. This player also has an auto stop feature that's supposed to stop the turntable when the tone arm reaches the end of the record. We still have our instruction disc that came with the machine. And the platter has this foam rubber pad on it that's dry rotting and crumbling apart. Actually, I remember these machines from back in the 80s when they were still in widespread use, and those rubber pads were a problem even back then. So, let's fire this up and see what happens. Okay. Okay, the amplifier seems to be working. However, we have no platter rotation, and it sounds like the motor is not operating. I suspect the trouble is probably the automatic shutoff switch. It's probably out of alignment or otherwise fouled up. And I guess while we have this apart, we'll do a general cleaning and lubrication of the drive mechanism. Sounds like something's popping in it. But yeah, we have no motor activity. Okay, let's get this apart and see what's going on with it. Okay, the first thing I want to do is remove the turntable platter. And by the way, the steps I'm about to outline you can use for servicing your manually operated kiddie phonograph from the 50s or your califone or audiotronics school record player. The principles are all the same, just the speeds are different. But first we want to remove this turntable platter, and the way you do that is to gently pry off this little clip here, and then you can take a rubber mallet or the rubber handle of a screwdriver or whatever's handy and just lightly tap the spindle a few times, and then once you do that, the platter should just lift off. Okay, we have our clip removed. Just tap that a few times, see if it'll lift off now. Okay, we have the platter removed and the motor is not rotating, which leads me to believe that the problem is with that off-on switch. Now let's open it up and gain access to the underside. And the way you get this machine apart is turn it upside down and remove the 4 1/4-inch bolts on each corner, and then the motor board will simply lift off. Here's the underside of our player, the amplifier, the motor, which is a nice size motor for a portable phonograph. Here's our automatic shutoff switch. They were nice enough to give you a schematic diagram. Now the screws that hold it all together in this case remain captive, so you don't have to worry about them falling out. It makes it real easy to put everything back together too. And our motor was made by General Industries, date coded the 51st week of 78. Okay, that was an easy enough problem to fix. This black lead here on the circuit board had come loose. The way this works, this is our automatic stop board. We have a DC voltage coming in here, the yellow and black wire, which is provided from our amplifier chassis. The red and brown wire are our switch contacts for this relay here. We have this magnetic disc, or piece, or whatever you want to call it, on the tone arm, and whenever it passes through the gap on this sensor here, it turns this transistor on, which opens these relay contacts to kill the motor. Or at least that's the way I think it works. I haven't looked at the schematic yet, but that makes perfect sense. Actually, this connector was very loose, so I'm going to crimp it a little bit tighter so maybe it'll stay on better. Okay, hopefully the camera will pick up the motor running. Now I'm going to move this tone arm. And you heard it stop. So that's how the automatic stop feature works. Okay, I noticed when I first got this thing, when I manually rotated the turntable by hand, it made a wobbling sound, and turning this center spindle, it's obvious the grease has turned to powder. So the first thing I'm going to do is pop this, or should I say the next thing I'm going to do is pop this clip off, pull the spindle out, clean it off real good, and reapply our famous non-vaginal lithium grease to the center spindle and its bearing, and that should solve that problem. Okay, here's our spindle, retaining clip, and 2 washers removed. You have to be very careful when removing that clip. You don't want it to fly across the room. Okay, I just used a paper towel soaked in alcohol to clean the gunk off of the spindle, and I used a Q-tip dipped in alcohol to clean this bushing out right here. Now we'll just apply some white lithium grease, put it all back together, and the spindle should be good to go. Okay, here it is, sort of put back together. Let's give it a shot and see what it does. Okay, sometime tonight, please.
The instructions for the operation of your talking book machine are recorded in English on this side. Instructions in Spanish are recorded on the other side.
Las instrucciones para el uso de su tocadiscos son grabadas en español en el otro lado de este disco.
The carrying handle should face you as you listen to these instructions. This record is being played on a round turntable using a device known as a tone arm. To reach this portion of the record, you moved the tone arm from the tone arm rest to the edge of the record.
Okay, not bad so far. I like moving in the right direction. And our auto stop mechanism works as it should. So now we'll move on to taking the drive mechanism apart. And it's scraping you hear is the record rubbing against this speaker wire. But now we'll take the drive mechanism apart, give it a good cleaning and lubrication. You know, when I get through with this, I want it to be good to go for the next 20 or 30 years or more. Okay, we're ready to continue. We have our lubricants here, the white lithium grease and the Zoom spout oil. The blue 3-in-1 non-detergent motor oil will work just as well. And we have our contact cleaner spray. We have our rubbing alcohol, what's left of it. We have an assortment of hand tools, and we have our little tray to put our parts in. Now, this particular record player doesn't have an easy way to attach the tone arm to its rest, so I unplugged the needle cartridge just to prevent it from getting damaged. This is an 83D PowerPoint cartridge, which is a dual diamond LP cartridge. You can put an 89T in place of it, but the 89Ts are generally sapphire tipped. And these PowerPoint cartridges are getting very expensive, so I don't want to break one if I don't have to. Okay, the first thing I want to do as far as taking this assembly apart is we need to remove our idler wheel. And the way we do that is to remove this little clip here very carefully. You don't want it flying across the room. And then you'll notice some washers above the wheel and below the wheel. Once you lift the wheel off, you'll want to carefully remove those washers, taking care not to lose the washers, and take note of how many washers go above and below the wheel so you can put them back in the right order. Here's our idler wheel removed, and you can notice some stray lubrication on here. It's the same stuff they use to lubricate the rest of the mechanism. And you can notice how hard it's starting to get a little hard on us. It's not exactly the consistency that it should be anymore. Next, we'll clean out the center hole of the idler wheel, and to do that, I'll just take a Q-tip dipped in some alcohol and just clean it out real good, and then dry it off, and that part will be good to go. Oh, and there's one other chemical you need if you're going to work on record players, and it's something we are almost out of, but we have enough to do this. It's a product called Rubber Renew. We use it to clean the surface of the idler wheel. And this idler wheel looks to still be in good enough shape that all it'll need is a good cleaning. Sometimes these wheels get so worn that you have to send them off to have them rebuilt because they're no longer made. I can remember when I could buy these for $5. Well, now you have to send them off to places like thevoiceofmusic.com or vintageelectronics.com and have them rebuilt at the cost of around $28 plus shipping. It seems kind of high, but what do? What can you do? Now, the way I do this is apply a little bit of Rubber Renew to a paper towel, and then coat your entire drive surface of the wheel with the Rubber Renew, and then let the wheel sit for a few minutes and let the Rubber Renew penetrate the rubber driving surface and dissolve. And once the Rubber Renew has time to dissolve, you just rub the wheel down with the dry portion of the paper towel, and it should be good to go. And now our idler wheel is treated, and the rubber surface has plenty of grip to it, so it should be good to go. Really, come to think of it, I have an idea this record player hasn't been used much since the instruction record was still on the turntable when I got it, which normally when these things have seen a lot of use, the instruction record is nowhere to be found, and both tips on the cartridge still appear to be in very nice shape, which on models that's seen extensive use, the stylus tips are generally worn down. This thing actually probably died from just sitting up for 30 years not being used, or possibly that lead came loose on the circuit board that I showed you earlier in the video that killed the turntable motor, so the thing just got set back and never used after that. Okay, now that we have our idler wheel taken care of, the next thing I'd like to do is remove this assembly here. And the way you do that is, number one, you want to be real careful here. You want to hold this spring down, and there's a washer above this spring, and you want to gently pry off this clip here. Now, be extremely careful because you don't want parts flying across the room never to be found again. And then gently lift this off, and then detach this spring, and then this whole assembly should come out. And here's this assembly removed, and with that out of the way, you can get a better idea of this old lubricant here that's starting to turn to paste. And one thing I might suggest, if you're new to this, instead of getting just a container like this to keep the various parts in, get an old egg container that you've obviously emptied and put the parts for each individual piece in a separate compartment in the egg container, and then you can label the compartment as to what goes where. And also take full advantage of your digital camera. Take plenty of photographs of where everything goes, and that way you'll know where things go whenever you get ready to reassemble the unit. Okay, now what I want to do concerning this piece is I want to clean this here, this shaft here. That's where the idler wheel attaches, and we'll use a paper towel dipped in alcohol for that. I'll also want to run a Q-tip dipped in alcohol down through this hole here, clean that out good. And we'll also want to clean off this junk here with some alcohol. You see we have some lubrication build up there. And then I will also want to pop this clip off very carefully and separate these two pieces and clean these two pieces, this shaft here and the hole that right here, with alcohol and a paper towel and a Q-tip. And there's our clip, and our pieces separate just like that. Now we'll want to clean this thoroughly, as well as clean this hole here thoroughly. We want to get all of this old lubrication out of the way. I don't know how well the camera's picking this up, but if you'll look down in that top hole, you'll see some of the remains of some of the old lubrication that is now turned into like a greenish, yellowy, powdery type substance that needs to be cleaned off. And we'll use the alcohol for that purpose. And sometimes you'll run into some crud that the alcohol is not strong enough to penetrate, and in that case we use the contact cleaner spray. That'll usually do it. Okay, all this is cleaned and ready to be put back together, but not before I lubricate it. And the way I like to lubricate these is to apply a very small coat of the white lithium grease right here, and then I'll mix in 1 drop of the zoom spout on top of that, and then everything should move freely then. And there we are. And if you overdo it and make a mess like I just did, it's no big deal. Just take a Q-tip and clean it up, and you'll be good to go. And here we are cleaned up. Everything's moving nice and freely now. Now the reason you don't want to get carried away with the lubrication is you don't want to take the chance of getting lubrication on 3 main parts of the mechanism. Number 1, you don't want to get any lubrication on the motor shaft. You don't want to get any lubrication at all on the rubber drive surface of the idler wheel. And 3, you don't want to get any lubrication at all on the inner rim of the turntable. If you get any lubrication on any of those 3 points, then depending on how much lubrication you accidentally get on there, the machine may not even run at all, and if it does run, the speed will be incorrect and or inconsistent. But however, if you make a boo-boo and get lubrication on one of those 3 points, then just clean it off and move on. It's no big deal. I've done it lots of times, not paying attention to what I'm doing. Okay, next we need to get all this dried lubrication off here, and we have a layer of it here. We need to get as much of that off as we possibly can, which should be all of it. Okay, back on the record player, but before we continue on the drive mechanism, I need to make a correction concerning the auto stop circuit. I think I originally said that was a magnetic sensor. Well, I was wrong about that. That's actually a light sensor. What we have is an optocoupler, and that little disc on the tone arm is just a light interrupter. Under normal playing conditions, light is emitted from the light emitting diode of the optocoupler, which is picked up by this photo sensor, which turns this transistor on, which acts like a switch to provide voltage across this relay coil here. And of course, when the coil is energized, these contacts are closed, which provides power to the motor. Now when the tone arm moves to the end of the record, the little disc on the tone arm comes in between the LED and the photo sensor, which interrupts the light source, which turns off this transistor, which opens the circuit for this coil here on the relay, which opens the contacts, which kills the motor. Okay, and now that we have that corrected, we'll move on to the mechanism here. Alright, I've already got all this cleaned up, and I'll now apply some lubrication to all these points here that need it, here, and a little dab here where this piece here slides. Okay, that's done, and we're now ready to reinstall this portion of the assembly. I've already applied a little bit of lithium grease to this contact point here, and I applied a very small amount of lithium grease to this rod, and I'll also put a drop of 3-in-1 oil, not 3-in-1 oil, the zoom spout oil on the Q-tip, and apply to this also. This is one of those areas where I like to mix a little bit of lithium grease and a small amount of zoom spout oil. And we just rub this on the shaft like this. We don't want to get carried away. And that should be sufficient. Now that's done, and next we'll need to reinstall our spring, washer, and little E-clip to hold this assembly in place. And once again, you want to be very careful. Don't let that spring fly off on you, because you'll probably never find it again. Okay, it's starting to take shape now, and everything's moving as it should. Now the next step is to remove the motor, and take it apart, clean it, and lubricate it. And the way we do that is you have to remove this clip, this clip, this clip, and then the motor should just drop out. On some drive mechanisms you have to remove some bolts, but this particular one is held in with clips. And while we have it apart, we'll probably go ahead and replace these 3 cone-shaped motor mounting grommets. Here's our motor dismounted. The next thing we want to do is remove all 4 corner bolts so we can disassemble the motor housing. Okay, we have the motor apart. We'll now clean everything with alcohol and then re-lubricate. Actually, this motor is not that cruddy, so shouldn't need too much cleaning. And if you'll look on these bushings, there's felt wicking around the bushings. The felt wicking is what holds the oil and lubricates the bearings. So we want to saturate those wicks with fresh oil. And then I like to put just a drop of oil to each bearing just to make things go smoother. And then put it all back together and it should be good to go. Okay, here we are almost back together. I have to tighten the bolts down. And one thing you want to remember when you're reassembling the motor is to, as you're tightening the bolts down, tap on the motor from all 4 sides to align the bearings. That way the shaft will turn freely whenever it's all put back together. And here it is running like a top. We'll let it run a little while and let the oil soak in. And the next thing I want to do is replace these 3 rubber mounting grommets. These are still together, but these have a tendency of dry rotting and crumbling apart. So if I can locate the bag of new ones that I just bought, we'll go ahead and replace those. Okay, there are 3 new grommets in place. Fairly easy to install. You just kind of have to work them through the hole until they're properly seated. And then they should last for another 30 or 40 years or longer. Okay, we're back in place. Now, just to be on the safe side, I want to dip the paper towel in some alcohol and clean this motor shaft just to just to make sure we didn't get any oil or any dirt on it during the reassembly process. And then we'll be ready to put the idler wheel back on, and hopefully we'll be real close to completing this little project. Okay, we have this spring here that fits on the bottom portion of the motor capstan. That's to make the capstan round enough or fat enough, or whatever term you want to use, to where it'll run at 33 RPM. And taking the motor apart, I wasn't going to remove this spring because they can be a pain in the butt to get off, but this one came off very easily. In fact, it was so easy that I didn't even realize it had fallen off until I noticed the spring wasn't there whenever I was putting it back together, and I looked on the floor and found it. And I'm going to tell you, it might have come off easy, but it didn't go back on very easy. Okay, I'm ready to put the idler wheel back on now, and I applied a slight bit of lithium grease to the shaft, as well as a slight bit of zoom spout on top of that. And we'll now slip the wheel back on, being careful not to touch the rubber surface, and hopefully this drive mechanism will be good to go again. The next thing I want to do is clean the felt off of this, the rubber off of this turntable, and judging how rotten it is, that shouldn't be a very difficult task at all. And then I want to clean the inside rim of the turntable platter with alcohol, and that should complete the mechanical portion of this. Okay, before we replace the platter, I want to remove the amplifier and clean the volume and tone controls. And I'll just check these capacitors and see what kind of shape they're in. If they're okay, I'll leave them alone. If they're starting to fail, I'll replace them. The way you get the amp out of these machines, you just remove the 1/4-inch bolt here and here, and then it'll just lift up. Okay, here are the 4 capacitors. The only one that checked really off was this 10 microfarad cap in the feedback loop. It's supposed to be a 10 microfarad. It checks double what it should. And, you know, since these are all low voltage capacitors and I have plenty of them on hand, I went ahead and changed them. And the brand name of these capacitors helped motivate me. I don't like capacitors that I've never heard of the brand name, and I've never heard of III. So they got replaced with good quality Panasonic and Nichicon capacitors. So there should be no problems there for a very long time.
Front corner of the machine and the turntable.
Okay, there we go. 8 RPM.
Outside this recessed area is a series of raised dots and a raised line. 1 dot means a record will play at 8 revolutions per minute, 2 dots, 16 revolutions per minute, and 3 dots, 33 revolutions.
There we are at 33.
Jack and Jill, June 1967.
Here's a 16 RPM record.
Company. Copyright 1967 by the Curtis Publishing Company. Recorded in 2 records for the Library of Congress in the studios of the American Printing House for the Blind in 1967. For special distribution as authorized by Act of Congress under Public Law 89-522 and with the kind permission of the publishers, the Curtis Publishing Company. Notice to listeners, it is important that talking book records be kept free from grit and be kept in order.
Okay, for the exception of replacing this turntable pad, I think this one's about done. Okay, I finally got all the remains of the old turntable mat off of this platter. It was a very time-consuming process, and we had to use such chemicals as Goo Gone, contact cleaner, rubbing alcohol, good old soap and water, and a lot of elbow grease with a razor blade and paper towels, but it's now clean and there's no sticky residue left behind. Of course, the platter is kind of scratched up from me scraping on it, but it doesn't matter because I'll be sticking something else to it. Haven't quite decided what yet. I'll need something that the flexible disc won't slip on, and felt may not be the best thing. I'm thinking possibly some of that rubber matting that they use in kitchen cabinets to keep dishes from sliding around, or possibly some of that rubber matting that they use in the bed of pickup trucks. I should be able to cut that down to size. I thought I'd take a minute to show you the difference between this talking book machine, the model A78, and this yellow A75 machine that we fixed in a previous video. This is the one that had the bad 10 microfarad capacitor in the feedback loop that was causing low output. And as you can see, except for the case color, they both look identical on the outside. However, there are some differences. This one here is all plastic, and our record guides are plastic. They turn back out of the way for 12-inch, or turn to this position for 10-inch. And this machine has an auto stop feature, and our speed selector is recessed down in this little area here. Well, on this machine, it's a little bit different. The motor board on this unit is still made out of wood. Obviously, our speed selector is not recessed down in a little hole. And this one still has the metal record guides. You slide them to towards the turntable for 10-inch, or back away from the turntable for 12-inch records. And also this one still has a circuit breaker on it. It's designed to trip in case of an overload. This one has nothing on it. Both units have the same IC-based amplifier, and both of these units are made by Interstate Industries. You might recall that company, the ones who made a lot of cheapy record players and stereos during the 70s and early 80s, but you know, these were built under contract from the Library of Congress. And I'll leave you with the original instruction record that came with this machine. But that said, thanks for watching, and we'll do something interesting again real soon.
Instructions for the operation of your talking book machine are recorded in English on this side. Instructions in Spanish are recorded on the other side.
Las instrucciones para el uso
And this may slip a little bit since we don't have a mat on the turntable.
The carrying handle should face you as you listen to these instructions. This record is being played on a round turntable using a device known as a tone arm. To reach this portion of the record, you moved the tone arm from the tone arm rest to the edge of the record. For future listening, it is recommended that you always place the tone arm on the record first. Then turn on the on-off power switch. This paddle switch is located directly in front of the tone arm rest. To locate the tone control, place your hand on the right edge of the tone arm rest. Slightly behind and to the right, you will find the roll type control that changes the tone of the recording. Just behind the tone control is a roll type control that changes volume. This machine has 3 speeds controlled by the speed change lever. This lever is located in a recessed area between the left front corner of the machine and the turntable. Outside this recessed area is a series of raised dots and a raised line. 1 dot means a record will play at 8 revolutions per minute, 2 dots, 16 revolutions per minute, and 3 dots, 33 revolutions per minute. When the speed change lever is in the raised line or neutral position, the talking book machine is still using power. You may hear sounds from the speaker indicating that the amplifier is still on. But with the speed change lever in the neutral position, the turntable will not operate. If you need to return your talking book machine for service, place the speed change lever in the 3-dot position to prevent damage. At the front of the tone arm itself is a cartridge with 2 diamond needles. When one of the needles becomes damaged or worn, you can bring the spare into playing position. A small lever protrudes from the bottom edge of the tone arm. Push this lever down and continue rotating it under the arm until it stops at the opposite side. The new needle is now ready to use. When both needles need replacement, follow this procedure. Lift the tone arm slightly. Using your thumb and forefinger, grasp the tabs on the needle cartridge and pull the cartridge firmly toward you. To insert the new cartridge, hold the tabs with the needle toward you. The cartridge is shaped to fit into its holder only in the correct direction. Insert the cartridge in its holder and push it firmly back until it stops. Replacement needle cartridges may be ordered through your library. On the outside of the machine, in front, below the right-hand latch, you will find a jack for headphones or a pillow speaker. The loudspeaker does not operate while either headphones or a pillow speaker are plugged in. The headphones or a pillow speaker may be ordered through your library. Some records in the Library of Congress collection are 10-inch hard discs. Use the two adjustable tabs to center these 10-inch discs on the turntable. One is at the right rear of the turntable. The other is next to the tone arm support. Turn both tabs as far counterclockwise as they will go. They should now point toward the spindle. To place a 10-inch record on the turntable, follow this procedure. With the right-hand edge of the 10-inch record tilted slightly downward, slide it to the right across the turntable until it touches both tabs. The record can then be lowered onto the spindle. If you wish to play 12-inch records, the tabs must be turned clockwise as far as they will go. You can center flexible discs by placing a finger on top of the center hole of the record. The spindle can be felt through the record as you move it around on the turntable. This talking book machine also has a feature for locating the tone arm on the record edge of hard discs. If you slide the tone arm gently down the left edge slope of the tone arm support, the needle will drop into the first groove of the record. The edge locator will not work with flexible discs. Your talking book machine also includes an automatic shutoff device. Once the narration on each side of a record is finished, the motor and amplifier will turn off automatically.
Wrong,
the needle
just the
will remain
motor.
on the record. To restart the machine, lift the arm and return it to the arm rest. The loudspeaker is mounted in the lid and connected to the machine with an 8-foot cord stored in the loudspeaker. The lid may be left attached to the base, and when fully opened it will remain upright without additional support. You may want to detach the lid and use it as a freestanding or hanging speaker. To remove the lid from the base, partially close it and slide the lid to the right.
And like I said earlier in this video, you can use the steps outlined to repair the mechanism and pretty much any single play phonograph from the 50s through the 70s. So hopefully what was presented here will help you out some in the future.
Match up with the hinges on the base. When you finish playing a record, return the tone arm to the tone arm support. If the lid is closed with the needle still on the record, the tone arm, the needle, and the record.
Okay, there you go. Thanks for watching, and more to come later.
On the tone arm